Okay, I think we will make a start. We've quite a lot to get through, and we also want to leave plenty of time for questions at the end as well. So welcome everyone to the University of Galway's Rural Voices monthly seminar series. And this is established in conjunction with the Department of Rural and Community Development in operation since January 2022. My name is Shane Conway. I'm a member of the Rural Studies Centre here in the discipline of Geography at the University of Galway. And I'm joined here today with my colleague, Dr. Frances Carter. Dr. Maura Farrell, who you probably know, who usually chairs these sessions, sends her apologies. She's actually away in Italy at the moment, attending a third community of practice networking event for the Falera Female-Led Innovation in Agriculture and Rural Areas Horizon Europe project that we are leading here in Galway. So that's where she is. And this Rural Voices provides this platform for academics and key rural stakeholders from across Ireland and Europe and even further afield to present their research or rural projects and network with others, which you're doing there in the chat box already, both within and beyond academia, and to invite discussions around key rural areas. Today's Rural Voices seminar series features renowned academics Dr. Caroline Crowley and Dr. Brendan O'Keefe, and as well as contributions from Dr. Karen Keaveney. And they'll speak about their evaluation of two EU LIFE projects in Ireland. The Corncrake LIFE, which operates in coastal parts of Donegal, the Erris Peninsula and northwest Connemara, and it seeks to increase the number of breeding corncrakes in these areas, and the KerryLIFE, operating in the Iveragh Peninsula, focused on maintaining pristine water quality and supporting the life cycle of the freshwater pearl mussel. And this session, this Rural Voice session, will focus on ways in which these projects, and they're generally multi-stakeholder partnerships, have promoted engagement with farmers and rural communities, NGOs, statutory bodies, and how this interaction engagement has affected attitudes to and behaviours in respect of ecology. So without further ado, over to you, Brendan and Caroline, and thanks so much for offering to speak to us today. So I look forward to hearing your presentation.
Yeah. Okay. Good meal maggot Shane agus good maggot Francis a socht an fáte a chur loin inniuh. Couldn't she Anna has sorin we lived inniuh. Our colleague Caroline, my colleague Caroline Crowley will be speaking after me. This is a joint presentation, and our colleague Karen Keaveney, who has been with us on this research journey, she's teaching this afternoon, so she gives her apologies for that reason. So at the outset, we'd like to acknowledge some of the people who are in the virtual room with us this afternoon. I see Professor Jim Walsh, Emeritus from Maynooth University. Jim co-supervised our respective PhD thesis when we were in Maynooth. I also would like to acknowledge Joseph McCrahan, there from South Kerry Development Partnership, who was very involved in the KerryLIFE programme. Aoife Cairns, who did subsequent research on KerryLIFE. And we'd also like to thank at the outset John Carey and his team in Corncrake LIFE, Richard O'Callaghan, who worked with his team on KerryLIFE, and all those who participated in the various research projects, including the farm households, the various communities, the various agencies and organisations who all contributed to in giving us a better understanding of both LIFE projects. So just to begin there, on the screen on the right-hand side, you see the freshwater pearl mussel in there with the fish. On the left-hand side, you see the corncrake, and in the centre then, you have their respective habitats. In the case of the corncrake, it's farmland, it's meadows, and we'll talk more about that. In the case of the freshwater pearl mussel, clearly it's the river. And if you focus in there on the river, which is the upper Cara in the Iveragh Peninsula, you see work farmers have been doing through KerryLIFE to protect that water quality, protect that water course. You see the fencing there. So we'll go into the details now, in as much as we can, of our two case studies. These are not simultaneous or parallel case studies. There are overlaps in respect of the methodology, but our methodology has been evolving because KerryLIFE, as you see on the left-hand side, that socioeconomic evaluation was published in 2020. It was an ex-post evaluation, I'll talk to you a little bit about the methodology, and we have strengthened and grown that methodology as we are now working on the evaluation of Corncrake LIFE. The evaluation of Corncrake LIFE is ongoing. Today, we'll be able to share with you results from our baseline evaluation, and we're also extending an invitation to you today to contribute to the interim evaluation. The letter E is missing from evaluation there, just got a bit covered. But you see the link to a survey questionnaire that's open to anybody who has an interest in conservation, nature, the environment, ornithology, etc. It's a wide community, or any agencies or organizations, statutory and non-statutory, that are working in those fields. So there's a link there, and we can put that in the chat, and there's also a QR code because these slides will be available to you afterwards. So please, this questionnaire, the data collector, will be open for a few more days, and we're very much welcoming of any contributions that you will be able to make in that regard. It's important to get our definitions and terminology right from the outset. And so we're working on high nature value farming. We're looking at results-based payment systems. It's an opportunity for me to acknowledge the ongoing work in this field of Dr. James Morden from the Atlantic Technological University. And indeed, here we're quoting his contribution to an ongoing blog by the National Biodiversity Data Centre, in which he reminds us that high nature value farming takes place in areas that support biodiversity, their habitats, species, and these are of national and international conservation concern. He notes in the second point there how the practices that pertain in those areas have been adapted by generations of farmers. So that intergenerational dimension is really important. The local knowledge is intrinsic to high nature value farming. And in the third bullet point, you see that this takes place across diverse landscapes. So high nature value farming practices in more intensive agricultural areas in the south and east, that focus on hedgerows and wildlife corridors and so on, are different to the types of practices that pertain in our Corncrake and KerryLIFE evaluations, and indeed catchment areas, and indeed other more marginal, more peripheral, and indeed upland areas of the west and the northwest of Ireland. But the principles pertain right across the diverse landscapes. So in terms of landscapes and catchments and so on, if you look at the map on the left-hand side, you see in red there's the Iveragh Peninsula, and then we're focusing then on this particular catchment area of two river systems, the Blackwater and the Cara, and they're delineated there by the orange line. The green represents the local electoral divisions that we used then when we were doing our socioeconomic evaluation. So it's a catchment-based approach. That's the key thing here. And then if you look on the right-hand side, you will see the map of the catchment areas of the Corncrake LIFE. And unfortunately, they're very small catchment areas because the corncrake has been pushed to the periphery. There were corncrakes, right throughout Ireland. It's part of rural identity, but unfortunately, most of the country now, it's confined to folklore, heritage, memory, and so on, whereas it's those farming communities in the shaded areas in the maps that are continuing to maintain the habitats in which the corncrake is still active, still alive, still breeding. And those catchment areas then are visualized on the screen in front of you here. You can see the grass, the upland farming that pertains in Iveragh from the one on the left. And then on the right, just to point out again, this is from the Iveragh Peninsula in County Mayo, which is one of the catchments. And you can see there, there's a meadow, the hay is cut, but that photograph was taken not in June, but on the 17th of August. And you can see that there's so delayed mowing, that's part of the actions that farmers take to protect the habitat. But you can also see they didn't cut right into the ditches, there's a space there, a buffer zone left where the corncrakes can nest and where the chicks can be hatched and so on. So good practices pertaining in both these types of landscapes. They are also similar in terms of their socioeconomic characteristics. They're peripheral, as you've seen from the maps, but peripheral in terms of also distant from areas of agglomeration economies and so on. Farming there is farm family based. Incomes are extremely low. These are at the lower end of the scale in terms of farm incomes. The systems are extensive, as you can see from the photograph on the top right. We're talking about sheep and cattle rearing. Beef, there's very, very little, if any, dairying or so on going on in these areas. So extensive agriculture. The local economies are characterized by a narrow economic base, notwithstanding the fact that the tourism, particularly in the Donegal catchments, is also a driver of the local economy. It's contributing to a certain level of employment, albeit very much on a seasonal basis. But it's also important to acknowledge that tourism is putting pressure on some of these landscapes. So there's competition between ecology and tourism in terms of use, access to space. That pressure then can of course, result in, environmental degradation unless well managed, but it can also contribute to economic development and reinforce strengthen local communities and so on. So that's something that we could unpack maybe in another webinar. These areas are also characterized by rural depopulation, aging populations, land abandonment, and so on. They also have a strong cultural identity. Most of the catchment areas in Corncrake LIFE are Gaeltacht areas, with the exception of Inishbofin Island, and the KerryLIFE area is on the edge of the Iveragh Gaeltacht. Part of Glencar is actually within the Gaeltacht. So they're the types of areas, so different, but a lot of similarities as well in terms of approaches, practices, and experiences. Then very briefly in terms of our methodology, because I referred to the similarities, but also to some of the ways in which we've built on that. On the left-hand side there, you see the inputs into the survey instruments that we used. And I want to acknowledge the LIFE team and the steering committee members and so on in both locations, as well as James Morton and others who've contributed to our understanding of the context here. In addition, then, Caroline worked more than the rest of us on socioeconomic profiling of the catchments. Really important to understand the longitudinal socioeconomic dynamics of these places in which farming is contributing to the maintenance of these habitats. And of course, then we had our literature review, which enabled us to devise survey questionnaires, and we'll talk to you about the results coming from those. We did semi-structured interviews in the catchments, and in the case of Corncrake LIFE, then we have been doing online focus groups with the various stakeholders, and the stakeholders are there on the right-hand side, the farmers and landowners, the community, and that's a very broad definition of community there. We didn't have an online community for KerryLIFE, but we do now for Corncrake. And then we have the professional and the agencies, regardless of their roles, regulation, management, research, academic development, local development companies, very important in that space as well. So then in terms of the methodology, as I said, KerryLIFE was exposed, a snapshot in time, 2020. The work had been completed, but the objective then was to inform future projects. Whereas with Corncrake LIFE, it's an ongoing iterative evaluation where we have a baseline, midterm, end of project. We're now at stage 2, the midterm. So we get the 3 snapshots in time and contribute to enhancing the work of the teams and the farmers and so on in the catchments, as well as informing future projects. In terms of the numbers, you see on the left-hand side, KerryLIFE, the farmers and farming household survey, 50 questionnaires, 37 semi-structured interviews, plus 18 other interviews. And you can see the numbers on the right hand side in terms of Corncrake LIFE, there's more scope, more catchments, and so on. So we have 62 of the farmers, then there was 100 in, and we'd like to increase that very much for the midterm community. And then we had the professional stakeholders as well. So just one other point before I present the results is the conceptual framework that we used. We developed this, we applied this in the first instance, I should say, in KerryLIFE, and we're deepening it and expanding it now for Corncrake. So in green there, you have the resource, what are called the resource units. So those could be the freshwater pearl mussels, the birds, whatever species we're looking at. And then above that, you can see the resource systems. Those are the farms that create the habitats for those species to thrive. And then those exist then within a wider framework. And then in blue, you have the actors, primarily the farming households, but also the conservation teams, the people working on the life projects, and then the various agencies and so on who have a role in terms of management or regulation or local economic development and so on. And then we have governance then and the decision making that happens that affects the that the actors participate in with others externally and so on. And then you have the wider socioeconomic and political settings. So our evaluation looked at we concentrated more on what's in the blue in terms of the socioeconomic, because the outputs in terms of species and numbers and so on, the people looking at the harder sciences were doing that. But really, it's important for us then to look at the whole dynamics that are in the center there in terms of what's represented in red, the whole interfacing, the whole dynamics between the socioeconomic and the natural. Because if you look on the right hand side of the quote there, and indeed farmers on the call here may was identify with how populations in the past have been disenfranchised, as it says there by Morrison, by the imposition of designations or restrictions, whereas conservation that can help people to solve problems and build livelihoods contributes to both ecology and farming and local economic development. And that's the type of model that we need to be aspiring towards, and the yardstick by which we need to be measuring these programs. And as the graphic points out there, these systems are interdependent, and we need to make sure that an intervention in one place doesn't have detrimental consequences for downstream or somewhere else in a catchment or somewhere else in a community. So you need an integrated systems-based approach. And then here we're talking on the left-hand side there, we're representing that system and the fact that the farm and the farm household is nested within a wider set of systems, the community, the society, ecology, and all of those then, are affected by and regulated by agencies and so on. And if you look at the model there at the bottom, where you see the knot, that's representing integration. And it looks messy and it looks, crowded and so on, but that's the way it's supposed to be. Harnessing the various strands of knowledge and expertise and so on, as well as represented by the triscale then, the longitudinal, the historical, the heritage and so on of the various catchments. So that's the conceptual framework that we used to, if you like, as a yardstick and as a framework for the formulation of our questions. And then I'll give you a brief overview of the findings that we got from KerryLIFE, and then Caroline will speak to you about the emerging and ongoing findings then in respect of Corncrake. But just to flag as before we do, the commonalities, the convergence of experiences, notwithstanding the diverse contexts in which all of this is happening, just to flag to watch out for that. So first of all, what did the farming households tell us? They told us they were motivated to join KerryLIFE to improve their incomes, clearly, and that's, when you consider the context they're coming from, that's a very understandable motivation, but also to improve their farming practices, as you can see on the graph there in the top right. it's interesting, KerryLIFE was oversubscribed. Many farmers wanted to join and weren't able to join. They also told us that they liked, they benefited from, and they valued the solution-focused knowledge exchange that happened. That the interventions they were doing to support the freshwater pearl mussel were part of a wider approach to farm planning. And they appreciated the knowledge exchange and sharing with the advisor. It wasn't the advisor telling them, oh, you're making mistakes or you're doing the wrong thing or you should do this or what the other. It was, the advisors were listening, they were taking on board what the farmers were saying as well. So there was a co-design, a partnership approach here. They also reported that while they had, in terms of folklore and history and local knowledge and so on, and awareness of the freshwater pearl mussel, that they said that KerryLIFE gave them an increased or more acute awareness. And they could also see more clearly how their on-farm practices contributed to the life cycle of the freshwater pearl mussel and water quality in general. So they had a better understanding of the system and the cyclical approach, a positive impact in terms of the local economy, because the various investments that were made and the various items like the wire and stakes and so on that the farmers bought, they bought them in the local cooperative. So that was good for the farmer and good for local businesses as well. But they also told us they were subject to societal and systemic pressures. Social pressures, particularly for younger farmers, and we're talking primarily here males, that's just the profile of our farmers. And what is a good farmer and what is a bad farmer? And this narrative that's about in culture, in the predominant culture, that good farmers are farmers who are producing lots of food. Whereas good farmers are, producing food, but they're also protecting systems, protecting ecology. They're also being more sustainable. So, that labeling of farmers of good and bad, and this notion of armchair farmers and so on, and that's unhelpful in the context of promoting a more sustainable approach. Also systemic pressures, because KerryLIFE was on the margins, and like these agri-environmental schemes, they get very, very little money and very little support, either through popular culture or the media or policy, as we'll see later on, relative to what productivist, the industrial model of agriculture gets. And that's difficult when you're trying to farm sustainably. You're there protecting the water quality, and there's another fellow up in a track machine, and he's considered to be the better farmer, more, yeah. And you can see a quote from a farmer there on the right-hand side: "You're helping your own place." It's really interesting that he uses the word place and contribution of all of this to placemaking, the environment, and then you can see the financial aspect coming through there in terms of the green money. So farmers' recommendations are that we have in future a more of a catchment-based, a much more holistic approach. It's all very well for farmer A to be in an agri-environmental scheme if his or her neighbours are in it as well. Whereas as the scheme was oversubscribed, some farmers were in, some farmers were out, and activities upstream or downstream from one farmer or another, they were affecting the water quality. The farmers also told us they want a long-term and a mainstream approach to agri-environment, not these stop and start schemes that go on for 5 years, then there's a gap, the regulations change, and some of the good work, and indeed much of the good work, particularly in terms of the outreach that was done, is undermined. They also talked about the need to challenge the productivist model and culture, and the way the farm organisations, policymakers and so on are wedded to productivism. They also told us they wanted more feedback in terms of the longer term impacts of their work on the freshwater pearl mussel. There's a scope there for citizen science. This is beyond the programme. And they underscored the importance of a multi-stakeholder partnership, because there was a steering group that was overseeing and managing the project. Farmers were represented on it. It gave them a voice. That's been dismantled since the scheme ended. And then an overarching recommendation, a need for joined up policies and practices, because there are contradictions in agricultural policy. On the one hand, you have predominant policies supporting productivism, and then the smaller sets of policies and practices then promoting high nature value farming. And indeed, the need then for other users of the catchments, others who contribute to the quality or not of our waterways, in terms of rural development, planning, housing, infrastructure services, all of these impact on the catchments as well. And then the findings from the community and professional stakeholders. And you see here these echoing very much what many of the farmers talked about. The importance of values, trust, relationship building, partnership, working with farmers, listening to them, taking their knowledge, their expertise on board. A catchments-based and results payments system, that holistic approach again. And for many of the professional and community stakeholders, community engagement was something new. They hadn't done the types of work that you're seeing there on the right-hand side, going out to schools, going out to communities, organising football tournaments, ways of engaging people and promoting knowledge and knowledge exchanges beyond the traditional agricultural extension model with which they were familiar heretofore. So that innovation and that community engagement is something that was an experience for them. They did talk about the need, though, but as you can see in the second set of bullet points there, the need for to focus on markets, particularly in the case of KerryLIFE, market for this high quality beef and lamb. And the need then to focus on other uses in these shared landscapes here, particularly recreational amenities, the need to embed life more locally, and then having that governance structure with a very clear remit, and certain stakeholders, being absent from that governance structure and the need to include them. And so just their recommendations before I hand over to Caroline, just to recommend the book there on the left-hand side, Farming for Nature, which presents not just the work of KerryLIFE, but lots of other case studies as well. The image on the bottom left, you see that co-creation, that sharing of knowledge, farmers and the technical advisors working together out in the landscape. And the image on the bottom right was from a conference that was held in Blackwater, in the Blackwater Tavern in 2019, where you had that knowledge sharing among farmers, community, professional stakeholders, locally and externally as well. And all of this points then to underscoring the catchment area approach. So again, this is reiterating what the farmers were saying: adequate and sustained financing and resources. Community development complements and adds value to scientific approaches to agricultural extension, and yet, it's not present to any great extent beyond these types of live projects. And so you need to work with communities in terms of other issues as well, like septic tanks, citizen science, involve more young people, more women, and a need for a much more joined up approach, as the farmers had also been saying, across policy and practice, and that partnership approach, the web of stakeholders, and extending that beyond the usual suspects, looking at really who is affecting the catchments. So I'll hand over to Caroline now to talk about Corncrake.
Thanks very much, Breandán. So we're going to head straight into looking at the findings and the recommendations that flow out of the Corncrake LIFE project. And what Breandán and I and Karen are trying to do in this presentation is we want to show that as, well, Breandán and I are freelance researchers, and then Karen is based in the School of Agriculture and Food in UCD. But we are very much learning through our engagement with these projects as the independent external evaluators of them. So we have been on a journey of learning from taking what we learned as evaluators from the KerryLIFE project, which was a number of years ago. And then when we were commissioned to evaluate the Corncrake LIFE project, which in many ways there's lots of parallels, but we brought everything that we had learned from the LIFE team, from the participants, the communities in Kerry, and brought that to how we approached Corncrake LIFE. And now as we're moving through the Corncrake LIFE evaluation process, as Breandán said, we're doing it over we're taking kind of 3 snapshots in time, and we've completed the baseline survey, and that's the results I'm going to show you. And we're now in the middle of conducting the interim survey, which, if, again, as Breandán said, if anybody is interested in participating in that after this presentation, there's still a little bit of time to do that, and it would be great to hear from you as a professional or if you are one of those community stakeholders. So what is clearly coming through from the KerryLIFE evaluation is this whole idea of nature conservation and social objectives being very intertwined. You can't separate them out, and why would you? But it is the approach that we have been taking, as maybe with our professional hats on, as people that have been trained specifically in nature conservation, or specifically in community or rural development, or specifically in economic development. So what's clearly coming through from the people on the ground is that no, you actually need to consider all of these together. And this is where we really see the value of the community development approach, the kind of approach that is being taken out across Ireland in the community development and the rural development sector for many, many years, for decades now. And that approach is one that is really community-based and community-led. So the community knows what the community needs and can identify the assets that they have already, and they have lots of knowledge and lots of experience. So that community development approach, we see the value of that in something like nature conservation as well, because it's accounting for people's diverse knowledge, experience, views. Like as one professional said in the Corncrake LIFE survey, we're all working with limited knowledge. So that's really recognizing that we need to have different stakeholders all around the table, out in the fields, working together on the ground. And then there's another asset on the ground, which I mentioned briefly. It is the coordination role and the networking that has already been done by experienced development organizations locally and regionally. Some of those are on the call here today, and really, really welcome. So there's this whole suite of organizations that are already out in the territories where LIFE projects are running, where European innovation partnerships are running, and there's lots of potential here for partnership, which is already being explored as well by LIFE projects and LIFE IP projects as well. And it's all pointing towards this multi-stakeholder, place-based, egalitarian co-design and co-production. And what we mean by co-design is that you have the multiple stakeholders there to design the project from the outset. So the project isn't designed by external consultants. It's very much designed with the farmers, with community members, and with professionals, all working together to design the project from the outset. And then the co-production piece is that it's implemented together. So everybody is recognized as having a role for implementing what is in that plan, what is in that design. And so what we just want to show here with the ladder of citizen participation on the right-hand side is, by the time we'd finished KerryLIFE, we were now tuned in to Corncrake LIFE, that we knew if we could see the higher level of engagement, so that the 3 higher rungs of the ladder, engagement, co-design, co-production, if we could see those in Corncrake LIFE, it would be really, really encouraging. So we're kind of jumping around a little bit here with showing you the results and the findings and recommendations. So again, we're just trying to weave this in probably a less conventional way than showing you everything kind of step by step and chronologically. And again, reflecting on the fact that we used very much a mixed methods approach in how we did our work. So here we're showing you 2 things. We're showing you the graph on the right-hand side of some of the Likert scale statements that we asked in the questionnaires. This one is this is the one filled out by the professionals up to 20 people completed the survey for Corncrake LIFE, the baseline survey. And this is where we're looking at, we were asking the farmers, the community stakeholders, and the professionals, all of them asking the same questions, you know, do they think farmers have a key role in carrying out nature conservation projects? And across the board, farmers were saying yes, community stakeholders were saying yes, and the professional stakeholders were saying yes. Do you think farmers should help design nature conservation projects? So again, you know, are we on track with this idea of with this recommendation for co-design? And yes, across the board, the stakeholders were saying they should help to design the projects. And then there was agreement. This is from the professionals. The orange and the orange ones are saying they strongly agree, and the light orange is that they agree. But again, the agreement that farmers should receive a payment for protecting habitats. So what were we hearing in the focus groups, for example, from the land managers themselves? One said the corncrake is coming here because of the people. The farmer's voice needs to be heard. What they're saying there is that corncrake habitat is it's habitat that is actually generated and regenerated through traditional farming practices. So the corncrake is absolutely dependent on traditional farming practices continuing. And that same person said, Corncrake LIFE is our first experience of consultation. Now, bear in mind that a lot of these farmers and land managers participating in Corncrake LIFE have land in what are called Natura 2000 sites. So they're protected under either the birds or the habitats, the EU directives. And the designations of their land as a site that is being protected under the birds or habitats directive, those happened back in the mid-90s. And here we're hearing, you know, almost 30 years later, this is our first experience of consultation. So that's quite stark. And then another farmer in the focus group told us, I had a query about fertilizer. I was apprehensive to ask Corncrake LIFE. I was told, you need to look after your crop, your enterprise. And the farmer continues, I was able to make that choice. I had support. It was left up to me. They're working alongside me. It's a completely different approach. So now we're seeing not only are they consulting and engaging on the ground, we're actually hearing from the farmers that they're feeling that they're working in partnership and there's co-production. That's what this quotation is suggesting to us. So in terms of going back to that social ecological framework that Breandán showed earlier as part of our kind of conceptual, you know, grounding for how do we approach the story emerging from the evaluation. In our findings, we found that most farmers are at least second or third generation, and over half of them were at least fourth or fifth generation. So the graphic there on the bottom left is them telling us how long the land that they had in Corncrake LIFE had actually been in their family. That's a long time. That means that they are bearers of traditional knowledge and practices that have been developed locally by earlier generations, very much embedded in the natural and social fabric. And that's the lived circular economy. I mean, there's an awful long history of interdependence between people and corncrake in these areas. So this is really highlighting the culture in agriculture. And those traditional farming practices are human activity that's very tuned into local geology, soils, landscapes, and water catchments. So our recommendation here is to include appropriate local farming knowledge and practices in the co-design and co-implementation of the projects to combine that traditional with the scientific know-how. So again, reiterating the importance of co-design and involving the other stakeholders. Beyond the farmers, it's about including other family members, because remember, look at that social ecological framework. A farmer is embedded in their family, in their household. We asked the question, and we found that over half had been influenced to join the LIFE project by another member of their family. Most often, as you'll see in the graph here, it was a partner or spouse, or it was a son. Those two groups, the women in the family and younger people in the family, do tend to have higher rates of mainstream education. So again, it's another set of knowledges and experiences. They often have off-farm jobs as well. So just bringing that to bear. So our recommendation here was to adopt in future a household or family level approach to projects to include other family members with relevant interests, know-how and skills. It goes beyond the farmer. And then outside of the farm gate, it's about including local conservation advocates. In fact, they're both inside and outside the farm gate. So the findings is that before the LIFE project came to the area and started, farmers and other locals were already knowledgeable about corncrake and they were advocating for its conservation. So it did not start with the LIFE project. But because of the LIFE project and because of the resources that were now coming into the project areas, it was envisaged that pupils that were learning about the corncrake through the LIFE school outreach would become local advocates too. In fact, a grandparent said in their survey, it's heat from below, that they were recognizing that the children in their family had a real influence in impacting them as grandparents and their behavior. And we also found very high levels of awareness and trust in the LIFE team already, but people were less confident that they had influence over the project. So you see this difference between the trust and the relationship they had built with the team on the ground, but the project itself, it felt like it was being influenced or controlled from further afield. And that awareness was there and that sense of not having local agency. So our recommendation on foot of that was about, from the outset of project design and planning, identifying and involving those local champions that they're already conserving the species and or the habitats. And this is all about its relationship building, but it's recognizing, respecting and learning from local knowledge, experience and commitment. Oftentimes we hear about post-life, what happens after the LIFE project. And, you know, that's really about investing in the people that are on the ground and they're there for the long term and they have been there for the long term. So it really is about respecting that and that commitment and recognizing and investing in that for the long term. And how do we do that? All around helping to increase local trust in the LIFE project and local agency in the future of the farms, which, remember, the future of the corncrake depends on the future of traditional farming practices, but the future of the communities too. And I know that our time is running out, so we added in this testimonial. Look, I'm going to read it out really quickly, Brendan, because it's such a beautiful recognition of what we're talking about, conservation advocates. And this is from a person outside the farm gate talking about their neighbour. In the early 1980s, when I lived in Fanad in County Donegal, my neighbour Johnny Tommy McElwain heard the corncrake call coming from his cornfield at Ballylar. He was so excited and very forward thinking. He asked me to let an area of my garden go wild. So this is a farmer talking to a neighbour with a garden. He explained that when he cut his harvest, he would leave a little patch in the middle of the field for the little bird to hide. He managed to get the corncrake to move into my garden. I enjoyed many years of hearing the corncrake call and watching them graze on the short grass. The corncrake is still coming to Fanad, thanks to Johnny Tommy. So they're showing us, they're telling us this is who we need to support, the conservation advocates that are on the ground. So altogether, the findings are inviting us from both KerryLIFE and Corncrake LIFE to consider our collective future together through the natural and social fabric. Something that we haven't talked about yet, but it came up in every single one of our surveys with the farm households, the community stakeholders and professionals, was this issue around planning for new homes and nature conservation. So one community member said there needs to be a balance between human population decline in rural areas and nature conservation with regard to planning for families who want to settle there. A farm household member said holiday homes seem to be more important. That is so wrong. Not hearing this bird will be terrible. So we're hearing that there needs to be an integration here of natural and social goals when it comes to planning, so that local people can plan for future families in the area and all of the care needs and intergenerational interdependency that is reflected in that. But there's also clearly recognition locally that, you know, holiday home development needs to be balanced as well with nature conservation. And then a professional and focus group involved in the planning sector told us there have been less than 10 cases where either corncrake or other species have been a reason for planning refusal. Difficulties tend to be unrelated. For example, they're due to ground conditions and effluent, safe road access or sight lines, rather than being refused because of corncrake conservation. The solution, this professional said, is taking a managed approach, a balanced approach to the planners interpreting national objectives so that it's not a blanket ban. It's a considered consideration of and it's proportionate. And they went on to say the communication piece is important, including through local engagement to address myths. So this is what we're hearing. Our findings indicate that there's a perception that conservation objectives can pose an obstacle for new home building in areas where there are Natura 2000 protected areas. Clearly, living locally is vital for people to meet their needs, the needs for childcare, elder care, and much more. All of that intergenerational piece that depends on people living near one another to help support one another. But also local workers, they want to be able to live locally. Teachers were flagged, for example. You want teachers to be able to live locally. And then holiday home development shouldn't be prioritised over corncrake habitat. So our recommendation out of that was about commissioning research into planning refusals for new homes related to conservation objectives in the counties where Corncrake LIFE is being rolled out to determine the extent of the issue. So we're lacking data at the moment on this, evidence of what is happening. So we do need that piece of work to be done. And based on the findings of that data analysis, then you could establish what practices by local authorities are working well, because we heard some of those from people on the ground, and also what may need to change. And ensure that there is joined up conservation and planning policies and practices for those positive relations between corncrake and community. So it's the same thing over and over again, isn't it? We're just looking for the joined up, the integration. And in terms of farming, and this is the last piece before we move into our concluding section, in relation to the natural and social fabric when it comes to farming, our findings are overarching findings. The future of the corncrake in Ireland depends on farming with nature. So in terms of the corncrake specifically, it indicates a coupled human environment system in which social and natural components interact with one another. However, the current farming model, and I'm talking about the dominant farming model, erodes the interwoven natural and social fabric of corncrake areas. For example, there's low incomes through productivist farming. There's a lack of markets for the high nature value farming outputs. And that goes for the same goes for the KerryLIFE case study as well. This all points to there being poor prospects that undermine the next generation's interest in farming. And that message is coming through really, really clearly. So the recommendations from both case studies, from both life evaluations that we've been working on, overarching in terms of this is really about developing an integrated model of farming in Ireland. And we're using the acronym FACES. This comes from the work of psychiatrist Dr. Dan Siegel, looking at the integration of the human brain for childhood and adult well-being. But these characteristics really apply to any kind of system. They apply really well. So we're using them here for the integration that we think would be really helpful in the model of farming that we would propose out of these projects. And that is F, that it would be flexible. And flexible means being able to respond to the diversity of local, natural and social fabric in these different catchments around Ireland. A for adaptive, so that it would be able to be both resilient and evolve to change over time. C for coherent, it needs to be joined up and systems based. E for energized. So that is pointing to the need for it to be resourced and supported. So we are talking about financial support, but we're also talking about policies and practices all around in our systems and structures at societal level, at state level, that really do both resource and support the work going on. And S for stable. And to be stable, we would argue the model of farming needs to allow the different catchments for the farming to be very much place-based, rooted, embedded in the place, and stable in terms of having a generational time span to give farmers and families security, both financial and in terms of succession planning. So this leads us to our very last section, which I will try to wrap up. We just wanted to flag this with you, the 4 returns framework. And this framework is something that we think is responding to the kind of findings that are coming out of our life evaluations. So very briefly, what is the 4 returns framework? It begins with a bioregion, and a bioregion invites us to inhabit a place that is full of relationship, seeing where the natural boundaries of our bioregion are. We can then see the many ecosystems and human systems alive within it. And all of these systems, both natural and human, are connected. And it's also a connecting story that starts in deep geological time. It shows up in the landscape and soil, and then in the human culture. So the river catchment is a really clear example of a bioregion that we can all imagine, and we can see the connectivity through the waterways and the upstream and downstream communities and the rural and the urban. It really brings this idea of a bioregion to life. The 4 returns framework, so the 4 returns are the return of inspiration, social returns, natural returns, and financial returns. And the United Nations have mapped their sustainable development goals onto the 4 returns. So they really do see the 4 returns framework as being a model that marries well with the sustainable development goals. So just very briefly, again, introducing you to a framework that we're very new to as well. And there are experts on this call, which really happy to see that they're here as well. So the 4 returns are those return of inspiration, social returns, and natural returns. At the bottom, at the top, the time is 20+ years. So the framework is incorporating that generational time span that is being signposted. It's a realistic time frame to successfully implement these large-scale management activities with all stakeholders. There is a process that consists of a landscape partnership. So there you have your multi-stakeholder partnership. The shared understanding is coming together and finding that common purpose, and a mapping process helps with that. There's collaborative vision and planning. Then there's the taking action piece. So, this is all co-design and co-production. And then there's that monitoring and learning piece. That's the adaptive, feeding back in to a model of, in this case, farming that would be adaptive and can take those inputs and adapt to them. So I might just leave it at that. We really wanted to introduce you to it. There is a whole process of cultural change that is part of that to really help and support the multi-stakeholder landscape partnership to move through the processes, because collaboration is uncomfortable. So it's recognizing that. And the last one, we just wanted to flag with you that there are innovators applying the 4 returns framework across Europe at the moment. And we want to give a shout out to the Bioregional Weaving Lab, Southeast of Ireland, bioregion.ie. Go check it out, because they're doing some really interesting work in this space in Ireland to help us see how this might be a really interesting framework to use to do that weaving and integration of the natural and the social returns. So we'd really like to hear from you if we've left any time, but really curious to know how these ideas resonate with you in your own life and your own work and your own activism. So thank you so much. And Brendan might have popped a QR code at the end. I'm not sure if you still have it there, Brendan. Just again, if you would like to take part in the Corncrake LIFE interim survey. Thank you so much.
Excuse me. Thank you so much, Breandán and Caroline, for that really in-depth, holistic insight into the two projects. Really looking at this from at a human level, whilst the projects are addressing the habitats and the species, etc., the farmer themselves is really being delved into, and the broader ecosystem, and farmers being seen and recognized more than just food producers, but as providers of ecosystem services. So this a lot of lessons can be learned for future schemes, and there's been a really in-depth evaluation done in this particular cases. So I really appreciate this insight. We don't really have much time for questions, but there is one chat in the chat box from Laura Walls, just in relation to you, Breandán, your presentation about the KerryLIFE, that there is an acknowledgement that the farmers they're more inclined for a lot more longevity in such projects. But is this long term, or how has this been addressed for such long-term projects, or longevity in such schemes? Or is that a recommendations that you have that they should be longer?
Indeed, it is. And we saw there from Caroline's presentation of the four returns framework that this takes a generation, this systemic change, this shift that's required. So the farmers were talking about the fact that the freshwater pearl mussel takes a number of years to reach, to go from being a pearl from being a seed to, reaching adulthood. But they wanted to know what was their longer term impact. But you take that a step further and look at, in the wider set of learnings from both projects, and you can see the evidence then supporting the four returns framework and that longitudinal piece, and working right across the system, and with the evaluations, of course, feeding into better practices and policies right throughout. And on that, just while I have the floor, Shane, I've put into the chat there the link to the midterm evaluation, the interim evaluation of Corncrake LIFE. And like as we said at the outset, these slides will be available with the QR code, and then the link is there for everyone to take on the chat. And you can please disseminate that as well to colleagues.
Thank you, Breandán. Just another point by Aoife Kearns regarding acres, and it's bringing it perhaps more mainstream, this broad messaging around benefits of farming to nature. Just how would you rate acres in fulfilling the recommendations set out by your evaluations? Is there are they in sync, or can they be brought closer together? What's the general feeling around acres?
Okay.
It's something that's, sorry, Breandán, it's something that is coming up in the interim survey, and we actually devised questions around that as kind of follow up to our baseline survey. So we'll hopefully, Aoife, have more information on that down the road. I think we go back to the FACES acronym, and that would be the work of a team of whoever would evaluate acres CP down the road. Is it flexible? Is it adaptive? Is it coherent? Is it energized? And is it stable?
Okay, yeah, thank you, Caroline. And most certainly you're more than welcome to speak at a future Rural Voices session regarding any future work as well. So we can come back to that at a later date for sure. Is there any other question in there, Francis? Can you see anything?
There's a question there from Joseph McCrohan. What body in Ireland is best placed to mainstream these new models of farming? And no, I think that's about it.
That's a great question, and this is where the Common Agriculture Policy and the Common Agriculture Policy Framework in Ireland needs to shift, because at the moment you have Pillar 1, there's a continuity in Pillar 1 over time, over generations, whereas with Pillar 2 there's a competition for scarce resources that is unhealthy, and there's this, as we said, this stop and start, these 4-5 year programs, and that stopping and starting is very unhelpful to farmers and others, but farmers in particular, who are trying to plan and who are trying to make decisions about investments in their farms. So we need it's a systematic change that's required in the way the Pillar 2 is subservient to Pillar 1 all the time, and indeed not just in terms of policy but in terms of practice, in terms of the culture around farming as well. pick up any of the farm press, and you'll see this promotion of productivism, the promotion of machinery, the promotion of bigger is better, that the good farmer, the masculine farmer, is the man who's up on the big tractor, not understanding the systems and the longitudinal, not understanding the four returns framework that Caroline presented. It's unreasonable to expect farmers to be making the change when the system is what needs to be changed.
Yeah, no, thank you, Brendan. And from my work in this area as well, the good farmer identity as it's pitched is kind of aligned to this pillar one about productivism. So it's such evaluations that you've carried out and bringing the farmer's voice forward, that farming is much more than just producing food, that will hopefully inspire others moving forward. We are at 4 o'clock, so I will have to draw this to a close. But again, just want to thank Brendan and Caroline, and also Karen, who has been involved in the background in this. Thanks so much for the insights and the presentation and the video. There's a video recording of this that will be added to the Rural Studies Centre YouTube channel. So please feel free to disseminate that further, and we will send around a link to you all having attended directly, so it's for ease of access. And as Brendan kindly has said as well, the slides will be available as well for those of you who want to. And please fill out the survey so we have more data so there's more data available for in the future, and hopefully we'll hear back from Brendan and Caroline at a future date. But for now, thanks to you all for attending. I think there was over 50 on this meeting at one stage, so that's a huge number. So we're absolutely delighted to see that, and we look forward to seeing you again next month. And I think even when we're talking about this multi-stakeholder, I think Francis and I will be presenting some work on the multi-actor approach, closely aligned, but it's about bringing policy research and practice together regarding Horizon Europe funding calls in the future. So scaling up such projects at a European level, and the value of bringing this multi-stakeholder, multi-actor together that was spoken about today. So hopefully you can join us for that at a future date. But for now, I'm just going to wish you all a nice evening, and hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everybody.